Hi folks, welcome to today's Coffee and Colossians. We are Colossians chapter 1, and I want to refer to the verse that we're looking at, verse 8. Now yesterday I mentioned Epaphras in verse 7. And it was interesting because when we were talking about faithful ministers, dear fellow servants and so on, I happened to mention, or I put up a photograph as the cover for it, for Tim Keller. And it's so interesting because the verse today says this, and who also told us of your love in the Spirit. So, here where we are with this. Paul's an apostle. He's talking to God's holy people. He wishes them grace and peace. He thanks God for their faith in Christ Jesus and the love you have for all God's people. He talks about the faith and the love again. He says it comes from the gospel. He says the gospel produces fruit. That fruit is faith and love. He says you learned it from Epaphras, our dear fellow servant. And he then stresses again, Epaphras also told us of your love in the Spirit. They'll know we are Christians by our love. Now, I remember once preaching somewhere in West Scottish Highlands, and I remember a woman coming up to me afterwards and said, well, I enjoyed the sermon, but that's what the liberals talk about, God's love. And I said, oh, dear me, no. You cannot take that away. The liberals may talk about the love of God. They can't know it if they don't know who Jesus Christ is and deny who he is and deny his miracles and so on and deny his atoning work on the cross. But you can't start going around and saying that we don't talk about love because, don't let the devil have all the good tunes. No. This is absolutely essential. Now, I'll give you an example of what this love in the Spirit is not, and then I'll give you an example of what it is. So one of the responses was somebody asked, why the thumbnail of Tim Keller? And I said, because he's a faithful minister and fellow servant from whom many have heard the gospel. I and many others owe him a great deal. And the response to this was, David, you're more lost than many of us even realize. Talk about the blind leading the blind, in your own words, bizarre. Which was somewhat strangely liked by two people. Well, I don't like it. I hate it. I think it's an evil, wicked, ignorant comment. I think the person who evidences that, who said that, shows the exact opposite of what Paul is saying in Colossians. And not because it's an attack on me. But this, I've been reading something else because George Verwer died. And I've no qualms about saying this. And so I thought I would read a book called Revolution of Love and Balance. I think it's now just called Revolution of Love in its reprinted form. So I downloaded it on my Kindle to reread it because it had a big influence on me when I was a younger Christian. And it just so happens the chapter I'm reading today begins this way. All men shall know that you are my disciples if you love one another, said Jesus, John 13:35. Is this the way the rest of the world looks at the Christian church? Or do they merely see divisions and intolerance, criticism and narrow-mindedness? The narrow-mindedness of Christians is not a new problem. And he then cites Mark 9:38-41. He then goes on to say, now the Bible teaches us that the way to God is a narrow road, and yet we do not have the right to try to make it narrower than it really is by excluding everybody who does not think and believe exactly as we do. Sometimes we are so narrow-minded and so rigid that our hearts are not wide open to what God is doing. Narrow-mindedness is the opposite of an open heart, the opposite of Christian love. Well, people say, yeah, but don't you speak about, for example, Steve Chalk? Or, yes, because he denies the fundamentals of the faith. Because he's turned away completely from the gospel. Now, to say that Tim Keller denies, there's not a fundamental that Tim Keller denies. There are people who don't like his style. There are people who question some aspects of his teaching. But unfortunately, there are people who hide behind the guise of being faithful and claim that that is them being loving. No, it's not. It's not at all. He told us of your love in the Spirit. I think it's pretty hard to love all Christians. We do it because of what Christ has done in our lives. And that's why you see that. I think the phrase love in the Spirit, it's not a natural love. It's not people whom we like. It's not those who kind of click for us. I think it's a love for all God's people. And I'll tell you this. I've met people who might be in my own church who show no evidence of faith in Christ, no sign of fruit in the Spirit. And I've met people, for example, I can think of people in the Catholic Church who show a love for Jesus and an honouring of his word, and I don't understand how they're still, in one sense, in the Catholic Church, and yet in another sense I know that they're my Christian brother and sister, and I stand with them. I just think for us to be so narrow-minded as to exclude from the kingdom all those who do not dot every I or cross every T the way that we would like. When I think of the number of mistakes that I've made and the number of things that I've got wrong, I think I need to learn to be a whole lot more charitable towards others. So I love this love in the Spirit. And I think putting it in a wider context, I've given you a negative side, but it should be the case that when you walk into a church, when you see how that church connects and behaves, that people go, yeah, I got you, I got this, I know, I can see there's something here. I can see the love you have for each other, which isn't natural. And I want to be part of it. They told us of your love in the Spirit. I wonder if that could be said of me, of you, of your church. I hope so. And if you want to put stroppy messages on YouTube, go ahead and do it. But just realize that you're denying the very truth that you claim to be protecting. Bye.